What's up?
Hello everyone, this is a full compilement of the How I Met Your Mother vs. Friends video series that I have done over the past few months. I was watching Arlo's Breath of the Wild review video series, and I figured that I may as well do the same thing that he did, just putting all of them into one giant video. So here you go. I plan on adding in little segments of me talking about stuff that I may have missed, or just like comments that I want to add. But other than that, oh yeah, I'm also going to be editing out the ending segments for each of the individual parts, except for the last one, since that would just be redundant to hear them over and over. But yeah. Also, every statement I make in this video is under the pretense that we're following the alternative ending of the How I Met Your Mother timeline, unless I explicitly state otherwise. And since I don't think I'm forgetting anything else, let's get on into it. This is How I Met Your Mother is Better Than Friends Definitive Edition. Let's do this. I first began watching the television show How I Met Your Mother at about age 13 when a friend of mine recommended it to me. I found myself enjoying it a lot more than I expected, and at the time, I was still in the mindset that anything that wasn't a cartoon was inherently more boring than a show which was animated. But something about this sitcom grabbed me, and it would not let go for 9 seasons. 9 seasons which took me only a few months to get through, and which remained entertaining the entire way through. And upon the last episode, I, as many other people did, felt a hole in my heart which had been left by this show. One which I was desperate to fill as soon as possible, so to avoid the inevitable feeling of longing for days already past. I found solace in yet another sitcom by the name of Friends, and as I watched, I tried to feel the same way towards this newly discovered series that I had towards my previous endeavor. I thought surely it would be easy considering it seemed like a carbon copy of what I had just finished, but something was different. I chalked it up to the fact that Friends was just an older show than How I Met Your Mother and that it was made in a different culture, but as I continued watching and rewatching both of these shows, I realized that there was something more going on here. Something or some things which I hadn't picked up on earlier simply because I wasn't as observant. An explainable reason for why How I Met Your Mother captivated me while Friends did not. All the while, I continued to learn more and more about these two shows from my parents and my own research, and I was thoroughly surprised that I seemed to be a minority in my opinions of these two shows. I kept rewatching and contemplating the differences between each of these shows over the course of multiple years, and despite the consensus pointing in the other direction, I kept drawing the same conclusion, that How I Met Your Mother was far superior to its predecessor, Friends. Why couldn't anyone see the things I was seeing? Why did it seem like I was the only one who cared about the relationship between these shows? These questions and many more like them continued brewing in my brain up to the point that I was about to explode on the next person who said that they preferred Friends over How I Met Your Mother. Thankfully, that did not happen. I was granted a route to release my built-up thoughts in the form of entering a short video contest. Finally, I thought to myself, I can get all this stuff out of my head and move on with my life. But 'twas not to be. For the video contest tragically had a 5-minute time limit enforced on all of its submissions. Still, I tried to cram as many of my points into this video as I could, and I came as close as possible to going over the time limit, but even still, I had much more to say. I quickly realized that I was going to have to make yet another video about my thoughts on these two shows. However, at the time, I was in the midst of an entirely separate gigantic analysis project which I had promised to finish months ago. So I put the lid back on the pot and hoped it wouldn't boil over while I finished my other project, and this is where we finally arrive at the creation of this video. With my long-form analysis of Voltron Legendary Defender done, I could finally devote my energy towards putting to words what had only been a thought in my head for years. Why How I Met Your Mother is better than Friends. Answering this question thoroughly will take more than a quick description of each show and me pointing out that How I Met Your Mother does certain things better than Friends, though. A lot more. I already tried my hand at compiling all my thoughts into one cohesive video experience with my Voltron analysis, and that project took about 10 months to finish, so for the sake of not disappearing for another year, I'm going to be breaking my analysis of these shows down into several individual videos. Not only will this allow me to release more regular content on this channel, but it will also speed up the overall production of this project because I won't be needing to spend extra time making sure each section in my analysis flows into one another. Plus, I'll just be able to feel like I'm making more meaningful progress because I'll actually be posting the most recent section to YouTube instead of clicking save as. But now that we've gotten all that out of the way, let's actually get into explaining why How I Met Your Mother is better than Friends, starting with the characters. The characters are the most heavily compared aspects of these two shows, and for good reason. The cast of How I Met Your Mother was very clearly based on the cast of Friends. Ted is Ross, Robin is Rachel, Marshall is Chandler, Lily is Monica, and Barney is Joey. The only character who doesn't have a version 2.0 is Phoebe, and I'm actually pretty glad that this is the case, but I'll get into that later. The fact that How I Met Your Mother's characters are so blatantly based on Friends has caused many people to state that How I Met Your Mother copied Friends, ripped it off, or plagiarized it. And while I won't deny the fact that the cast of How I Met Your Mother uses similar character archetypes, I simply do not think that it's reasonable to discredit the show for this. First of all, the types of characters we can observe in these two shows are by no means original. You can't swing a stick without hitting a sitcom that uses the will they won't they plot thread between the main guy and girl throughout the vast majority of its runtime. There's also the characters of the advice giver, the new one, and of course the idiot, but what seems to be the real issue many people have with How I Met Your Mother in this regard is the relationships between the characters. In Friends, Ross, Chandler, and Monica have all known each other for a long time, and Ross and Chandler were even college roommates. Joey, a skilled ladies' man, comes along not too long before the beginning of the show, and the show starts with the introduction of Rachel, the career-determined, self-centered love interest of Ross. Likewise, in How I Met Your Mother, Ted, Marshall, and Lily have all known each other for a long time, and Ted and Marshall were even college roommates. Barney, a skilled ladies' man, comes along not too long before the beginning of the show, and the show starts with the introduction of Robin, the career-determined, self-centered love interest of Ted. As you can see, there are a few similarities. You might have noticed, however, that all of the descriptions I just gave of these characters are about how they start off in each show. This is because although How I Met Your Mother begins with the same premise as Friends, it quickly takes the story in a very different direction by making crucial changes to the plot. Arguably the most significant of these is in the will they won't they arc with Ted and Robin. At the end of the first episode of How I Met Your Mother, it is revealed that Robin is not the mother, and this is easily one of the most important differences between these two shows because it ends the will they won't they plot line. In Friends, the love interest between Ross and Rachel is brought up in episode 1, but it isn't resolved until the very last episode of the show. Their relationship is a constant plot thread throughout all 10 seasons, and if you're someone who's familiar with this kind of arc from the countless other shows which have done it before, you know that they end up together because that is how it always goes. Yet, Friends dances around the question, never giving you a definitive yes or no, and never telling you what you are already aware of. Hey, look, they're gonna get together. Oh wait, Rachel got a boyfriend. Ooh, looky, they started dating. Uh-oh, Rachel's mad because Ross slept with another woman while they were on a break. Let's not converse about who is in the wrong here, let's just make a recurring joke. But she still loves him, psych, they hate each other again. Actually, Rachel still loves Ross, but there's a bit of British in the way. What's the worst way we can deal with this conflict? Rachel's pregnant with Ross's child, but don't worry, they're totally platonic, and to prove it, we're gonna pair Rachel up with Joey, but uh-oh, looks like Joey read the script and now he can't get it up. And all along, they knew they were just meant to be together. It's like the show is dangling a piece of candy just out of your reach and going, maybe I'll give it to you or maybe I won't. Guess we'll just have to wait and see. How I Met Your Mother makes it crystal clear that although Ted is romantically interested in Robin, the two of them are not going to end up together, and rightfully so. The two of them have completely opposing goals in life. Robin doesn't want any kids and wants to go wherever her job takes her, even if it's another continent, and Ted wants to settle down and start a family. These two lifestyles cannot coexist, and the show knows this. Friends has a similar dynamic in Ross and Rachel. Hell, it's why they initially went on a break. Ross wanted Rachel around more, but she was too caught up in her career. The problem is that it's still hinted that they have feelings for each other and they still end up getting together, despite the numerous instances showcasing why they make a terrible couple. As much as the media loves to push the love is stronger than any force in the universe message, it simply isn't true. You can't love someone into deciding to start a family with you. You can't love someone into putting their entire career in jeopardy. You can't love someone into loving you back. Friends teaches its audience that love is the end-all be-all, and that's a bad lesson to push. How I Met Your Mother, on the other hand, handles the exact same situation with leagues more maturity and realism. For anyone who didn't read the text at the beginning of this video and is probably screaming at their monitor by this point, now would be a good time to mention that when I say anything about How I Met Your Mother, it should be assumed that I'm talking about the show with its alternative ending wherein Robin and Ted do not end up together. In the original ending, they do, but I'll get into that whole debacle much later. Anyway, Ted and Robin are handled much better as a relationship than Ross and Rachel, but what about as individual characters? Well, in the case of Ross and Ted, I can safely say that this is yet another instance of How I Met Your Mother far outdoing its predecessor. Ross is framed as someone who loves too much for his own good. He constantly puts the needs of Rachel above his own, and after getting a divorce just before the start of the show, he's left with trust issues that he'll have to work towards fixing. This is how Ross is framed. However, it's not an accurate description of his real character, and unfortunately, as the seasons passed, Ross's true colors began to show through. Ross may have everyone else fooled, thinking that he loves Rachel, including himself, but if you actually pay attention to his actions throughout the show, it becomes apparent that his true motivations are to possess Rachel and control every aspect of her life.
These new people and got this whole other life going on. I just hate that I'm not a part of it.
Maybe it's okay that you're not a part of it. I mean, it's like, I like that you're not involved in that part of my life. My work, it's for me, and it's scary, but I love it because it's mine. But I mean, is that okay?
Sure.
This can be most clearly observed in action throughout season 3, wherein Ross becomes jealous of Rachel's co-worker, Mark. He becomes extremely paranoid and untrusting of Rachel, which is what leads to their breakup. Now, I'm sure you're thinking, but doesn't Ross get punished for his misbehavior? And the answer is yes. However, if you know a thing or two about psychology, you know that punishment is not the best way to change behavior for the better. This is because it tends to create negative emotional side effects such as animosity towards the punisher, and because it does not teach the punishee what to replace the undesired behavior with. And we can see this exactly happening to Ross. He never figures out a way to attempt dealing with his trust issues other than to push them down and eventually explode, and he becomes more spiteful towards Rachel following their breakup. While it is good that Ross got punished for his actions, the whole situation is unsettling because he never learned his lesson. Now let's take a look at how I Met Your Mother handles a very similar situation. Ted comes to the realization that Robin has feelings for him while he is still in a relationship with Victoria. So he tells Robin that Victoria broke up with him, and then he cheats on her with Robin. In response to finding out Ted lied, Robin, get this, cuts contact with Ted. Now, I don't particularly like Robin. I think she's the weakest cast member in How I Met Your Mother overall for various reasons, which I'll get into later, but this moment is a perfect showcase of why I much prefer How I Met Your Mother over Friends. How I Met Your Mother is mature. Friends is childish. When presented with a narrative situation wherein there is some level of moral ambiguity, Friends chooses to make a running gag out of it, while How I Met Your Mother chooses to teach the audience a valuable lesson. How much blame can be put on Ted for his actions? He never meant to hurt anyone, and he intended to call Victoria and break up with her before sleeping with Robin. The only reason that didn't happen was because he accidentally picked up the wrong phone, and Victoria happened to call while he was in the bathroom. And what makes this entire situation work as well as it does is the fact that Ted, unlike Ross, truly loves Robin and wants to be with her without controlling her. He even briefly offers to change his entire life plans just to be with her before he realizes that it would be unrealistic and would only cause friction in their relationship. Ted is loving and supportive towards Robin to the point of self-destruction. Ted constantly sacrifices for Robin and even his other friends. At one point in the series, Ted learns that Barney is going to propose to Robin's coworker Patrice at a time in the story where Robin has fallen in love with Barney, and he is faced with the choice of whether or not to tell Robin so she can go stop it and possibly get together with Barney, or not tell her, let Barney get engaged, and have a chance with Robin for himself. Take a wild guess at what he decides to do. Yeah, he tells Robin, even after being told by Marshal to do what's best for his own self-interest. Even after that, and even after Robin profusely denies that she wants to take Barney from Patrice, Ted goes out of his way to take the woman he is in love with to the building where his friend is going to propose to another woman, and tells the woman he loves to go get with his friend because he wants her to be happy above anything else. That is what true love is, and does that sound like something Ross would do? I think not. On the female side of the romantic plot in each of these shows is Rachel and Robin. This is one area where I can't quite say which character I prefer between these shows. I really like that Rachel's love versus career struggle is something that develops over time as opposed to how relatively unchanging Robin is in How I Met Your Mother. I think that it makes Rachel a slightly more relatable character than Robin. I mean, how many audience members of each of these shows do you think were news reporters, and how many do you think were waitresses? I also find it kind of annoying how self-centered Robin can be. She does certainly get better as the show goes on, but I would have liked to see at least one episode where Robin is directly confronted with how she seems to think that she deserves special treatment due to her being attractive and on TV. Upon reflection, I think that I overstated how much I disliked Robin. While I would have liked to see an episode confronting her with her sort of selfish behaviorisms, I think that the main reason that she didn't mesh with me very well is just because of her comedy style. And after rewatching some episodes like Twin Beds, I wouldn't say that she's my least favorite character anymore. Rachel is similar in this regard, but I find her growth more endearing because her problem, rather than being egocentric, is that she simply doesn't know how to live the life of someone who isn't relying on their rich parents, and she is aware of this flaw in herself from the start and wants to change. Despite this, I think that Rachel reaches much lower lows than Robin, specifically in how childish and spiteful she acts towards Ross after their breakup. I mean, in her letter to Ross, she wanted him to take full responsibility for the breakup. Now, I don't think that Ross shares no blame in his and Rachel's breakup. In fact, I'd say that he shares most of it, but you cannot convince me that Ross had no right to be upset upon hearing Mark's voice in Rachel's apartment just hours after the two of them had took a break. Rachel should have understood what that situation looked like from Ross's perspective, but she was very quick to absolve herself of all the blame and actively spited Ross afterwards over the most petty things imaginable. Like, seriously, she's mad at him for falling asleep while reading her 18-page-long letter at 5 in the morning. What did she expect to happen? There's less to unpack with Robin and Rachel's characters than each of their love interests, especially considering I don't feel like they're as polarized as Ross and Ted. There is one aspect of these couples which I have neglected to fully dive into yet, and that is their actual endings. There is a lot to be said about the endgame of both of these couples, but getting into all that would be part of a bigger conversation and is definitely going to need to be a section of its own in this analysis, so this is where we leave off for now. Continued in Part 2. I find it much simpler to describe why Marshall and Lily are a far superior relationship to Chandler and Monica than why Ted and Robin are better than Ross and Rachel, because Marshall and Lily debatably fit the description of a direct upgrade from their predecessors better than any other couple. This is largely due to the fact that their story begins where it took Chandler and Monica 6 seasons to get to. Furthermore, once they're together, both of these couples narratively fit the role of an ongoing relationship, allowing them to lend a different perspective on the other characters' love lives that another single person would not be able to give. And I think that Marshall and Lily both do this much better than Chandler and Monica. The talks that Lily and Marshall often give to the other characters almost always feel very realistic and contain very valuable life lessons for the audience.
Being in a couple is hard, and committing, making sacrifices, it's hard. But if it's the right person, then it's easy. Looking at that girl and knowing she's all you really want out of life, that should be the easiest thing in the world. And if it's not like that, then she's not the one.
On top of this, we just get to know the dynamic of their relationship so much more than their predecessors. I could probably count on my 2 hands the number of episodes in Friends that dive into Monica and Chandler's relationship beyond, look how much they love each other, and lol, Monica is the alpha in the relationship even though she's a woman. Compare this to the countless number of relationship-defining moments Marshall and Lily get in How I Met Your Mother, including, but not limited to, anxiety over getting married, breaking up and trying to remain friends, getting married, buying an apartment together, dealing with the death of a family member, having a kid, and moving to the suburbs. Monica and Chandler do have their share of genuine moments involving exploring their relationship and how they support one another, but Marshall and Lily simply do the same thing, but better. Most of the landmark moments in Chandler and Monica's relationship come in the last few seasons of Friends, and they have to share episode time with 1 or 2 other B-plots. This frequently results in a lack of emotional weight, and it's made even worse by the fact that the show takes every opportunity to make a joke out of whatever situation they find themselves in. Take, for example, the Tulsa arc. Chandler ends up needing to move to Tulsa for work, which forces him and Monica to spend most of the week apart, which is especially difficult because at this point in the story, they're trying to get pregnant. After a while of Chandler traveling back and forth from Tulsa to Manhattan, he gets sick of being away from Monica so much that he quits his job to search for something he's more passionate about. Now that's all fine and good, but the devil is in the details. Specifically, this landmark moment in Monica and Chandler's relationship is caused entirely because Chandler fell asleep in the middle of a business meeting and accidentally agreed to move to Tulsa upon waking up. Now, it would be fine if this were a throwaway joke, but this seemingly random moment of Chandler being incompetent is the catalyst for a huge shift in his and Monica's relationship and for later development he would receive. And a large part of the emotional stakes of that development feels hollow because it's built off of something so, well, stupid. It doesn't ruin their arc together by any means, but stuff like this is pretty commonplace in Friends, and it just makes what are supposed to be hard-hitting emotional moments feel less hard-hitting. Furthermore, when he actually quits his job to seek out a career he's passionate in, he and Monica don't seem to be suffering any financial stress due to his decision, which seems strange considering Chandler spent pretty much his entire savings on their wedding. This is not true. Chandler did not spend his entire savings on the wedding. He only ends up being intent on doing that before Monica tells him that they should just have a small wedding. Though this does get into the conversation about Friends' themes, being that true love is the end-all be-all. If Monica didn't come to her senses, he would have spent years' worth of savings on the wedding, and that would have put a lot of financial stress on them later on because Chandler caved. It's little stuff like this that makes it feel like the biggest moments in this arc and many other arcs were not very well planned out, which contributes to why they aren't that emotionally powerful. But you want to talk about emotionally powerful relationships? Well, How I Met Your Mother has got you covered in the form of Marshall and Lily. Marshall and Lily's relationship is probably one of the best relationships I have ever seen put to screen, and that is because it feels so damn real. The show explores their relationship in a way that I wish so many other shows would. I can't tell you how many times I've seen two fictional characters have their development completely halted as soon as they got in a relationship, and I cannot possibly describe how much that frustrates me. So many shows, not just Friends, are guilty of this. They seem to treat getting into a relationship as the end of a character arc, but if you've ever been in a long-term relationship or even know somebody who has been in one, you probably know that getting together is just the beginning. And How I Met Your Mother demonstrates this nearly flawlessly with Marshall and Lily. We see the highest and lowest points in their relationship. We see their day-to-day interactions. We see how they influence one another and how their personalities bounce off of each other in different situations. One of my favorite sections of Marshall and Lily's relationship, and one that really shows how much more developed of a couple they are compared to Chandler and Monica, occurs throughout the middle of season 6. At this point in the story, Marshall and Lily have decided to start trying to get pregnant, and after a comically short amount of time, they become worried that they might be infertile. This results in both Marshall and Lily getting separately checked up to make sure they'll be able to have kids, and as luck would have it, Marshall's mom and dad visit at just this time. Marshall, having heard that Lily is extremely fertile and thus becoming even more worried that he's the problem, has a heartwarming conversation with his parents who reassure him that they'll love him no matter what, and later learns that he is indeed fertile as well. This comes as an extremely happy landmark for Marshall and Lily because the show has made it clear that starting a family has always been a plan for them, and now the audience can rest assured that they will indeed get to make that dream a reality. But then...
Something's happened. Your father, he had a heart attack. He didn't make it.
My dad's dead? I'm not ready for this.
Marshall is over the moon with joy from knowing that he and Lily can start a family, and suddenly the rug is pulled out from under him. Going from such elation to such sadness so abruptly makes this tragic moment all the more tragic. At this point, I feel like I should mention that I am personally fortunate enough to have never experienced the loss of a close loved one, especially not somebody as close to me as Marshall's father was to him. And I still cried when I first watched this scene, so I can only imagine how hard-hitting it must have been for somebody who has been through this. Throughout the next few episodes, Marshall stays in St. Cloud to help his mom out and continuously regresses into a child, having his mom end up being the one taking care of him. This is of course all a coping mechanism to deal with the loss of his father, and he realizes that sooner or later he's going to have to go back to his normal life.
You're not taking a step back. You're running away. And hiding out here is not going to solve anything. Just hold up in Minnesota because you're too scared to face reality. We got to go back to New York tonight.
It's time to get back to real life.
But returning to New York doesn't just make his issues disappear into thin air. More than ever, he hates his job at G&B because his dad never got to see him become an environmental lawyer, and he's terrified of having a baby because the financial burden it will put on him and Lily will force him to stay at G&B forever. And as sad as Lily is concerning Marshal's decision to put starting a family on the back burners, she supports Marshal to follow his dream first and foremost. Following this, Marshal takes an internship at the NRDC, but even this has unintended consequences. Lily can't deal with the stress of being the only one making money in their relationship and with supporting every decision Marshal makes, and she has a mini breakdown over it. Thankfully, right before she confronts Marshal about everything that's been eating at her, Marshal realizes that he's been putting a lot of stress on Lily and decides to start looking for a job that he can get paid for. This entire arc for Marshal and Lily was perfectly well thought out and executed. Every episode that focuses on them between episode 13, Bad News, and episode 20, The Exploding Meatball Sub, advances their arc in a meaningful and significant way that feels completely natural and realistic. Marshal losing his father was a terrible tragedy, and the show doesn't treat it like it's not, but it also brings Marshal back to his normal self in an appropriate amount of time. It is very clear that the writers understood how Marshal and Lily would logically react in every situation they decided to put them in, and how that reaction would progress their arc. I would not at all be surprised to hear that the creators based the middle of season 6 off of their own lives, as much of the rest of How I Met Your Mother is as well. And this kind of inspired, well thought out storytelling is almost completely absent in Friends. In one episode, Monica and Ross's grandmother dies, and while they're spending their last few moments with her, she suddenly comes back to life only to die again moments later. I know that this isn't a super fair comparison given that Marshal's dad, unlike Ross and Monica's grandmother, was an established character, but I think it still says something about the differences in these shows. How I Met Your Mother treats death with respect for the audience and realism, while Friends chooses to make a joke out of it. I mean, seriously, can I be the only person who got super uncomfortable every time Phoebe made a remark about her mother's suicide, often out of nowhere, and they play a laugh track?
Made a man with eyes of coal and a smile so bewitching. How was I supposed to know that my mom was dead in the kitchen?
To shift gears a bit, I'd like to go over a couple things involving these 4 characters that didn't quite mesh with my previous points. First of all, I'd like to mention that I think Chandler is the best character in Friends. He is the most genuine and likable person in the group if you ask me, and although I have some gripes with it, and although it takes a long time to get going, his arc about finding a career he is passionate about instead of a meaningless office job is one that I appreciate the message of, and one which I can even relate to on some level. Furthermore, his style of comedy meshes very well with the tone of Friends, making him by far the most consistently funny character, but I'll expand on that in a later video. Switching gears to How I Met Your Mother, I actually dislike how Lily is portrayed as someone who gives perfect advice and who can pretty much never be the bad guy despite showing off a lot of disturbing tendencies, some of which never get addressed. The whole Aldrin justice system comes to mind as the worst offender of this. Basically, when someone pisses Lily off, she steals something that they own, ranging from a baseball to an expensive ashtray to the suggestion of stealing someone's car, and hopefully I don't need to explain why this is a very bad and very illegal habit. I lied, the worst offender of this is actually Lily manipulating Ted's love life behind his back for years on end. Whenever Lily could tell that one of Ted's relationships wasn't going to work out, she would break them up. By doing things like hiding an earring in Ted's bed to convince a girl that he was cheating on her, asking Ted and Robin where they see themselves in 5 years and then feeding them answers to that question which are in conflict with one another, and literally impersonating the girl that Ted was dating and telling him that she wanted to break up. Now, I know that Lily had good intentions in all of these scenarios, but the issue is not her intentions, it's her methodology. Specifically, we never see Lily confronting Ted and whoever he's dating with the issues in their relationship and getting them to talk about it. She seemingly just immediately jumps into puppet master mode, and in a joke in a later season, it's revealed that she actually really enjoys interfering with and manipulating other people's lives. It was a joke, so I don't know how canon that is, but I feel like it's worth bringing up. This makes Lily a lot less likable for me because she just assumes that she's right and knows what's best for people, and she is fully willing to take action to completely alter the lives of her friends without even consulting them. And at the end of the episode that we learn all of this, Lily doesn't even apologize face to face. She writes Ted a letter and leaves him a cooked meal for him and his girlfriend. It kind of feels like the show believes what Lily believes about herself, that she's always right about everything, gives the best advice, and can be forgiven of any wrongdoings immediately, which just feels uncomfortable. On this topic, I'd like to mention that a character having flaws is not at all a problem for me. In fact, not having a perfect main character with no flaws whatsoever is pretty much rule number one when it comes to compelling storytelling. My issues arise when a character's problems are either ignored or, even worse, glorified, and I definitely get that impression from some aspects of Lily's character. Also, Monica does pretty much nothing relevant until she gets with Chandler. This concludes part 1B of why How I Met Your Mother is better than Friends. I know I said continued in part 2 in the last video, but that was my bad, so continued in part 1C. So now we get to a point in this video series where I have to deviate a bit from the structure of the last 2 installments because neither Joey nor Phoebe is part of a super significant relationship with another one of the main characters, and Barney, despite my comparison of him to Joey in part 1 of this series, really is barely comparable to Joey at all outside of very surface level qualities. But since surface level qualities are pretty much the best connection I've got between these characters, I may as well start there. There's a reason that in the last part I said that Marshall and Lily fit the description of a direct upgrade from their predecessors better than any other couple, because in terms of singular characters, Barney just blows Joey out of the water, and comparing the two really illustrates how masterfully crafted Barney is and how poorly crafted Joey is. Though at the beginning of each of these shows, you could easily be excused for thinking otherwise. It is my firm belief that Joey was at his best at the beginning of Friends and that Barney was at his worst at the beginning of How I Met Your Mother. The two both start off as womanizing playboys with an inflated ego, yet their undeniably charming personality, dynamic with the other group members, and glimmers of real compassion made them endearing and very entertaining. As time went on, however, they polarized. Barney's best attributes got further accentuated and expanded upon as his character got exponentially more fleshed out, while Joey's worst attributes progressively became his only attributes, or rather his only attribute, that being his intelligence. Joey was never known for being particularly smart, but he was at the very least functional. He would even occasionally crack the kind of witty, sarcastic remarks that Chandler is so well known for. But as the show goes on, Joey regressed. He devolved from an airheaded yet lovable member of the group to a child who seemingly needed constant supervision, else he'd break something or get lost or do something else that would cause trouble. He became Flanderized. Flanderization is a term used to describe when a character's secondary traits slowly become their entire character. The prime example of this is of course Ned Flanders from The Simpsons, who this term is named after, but this isn't a video about The Simpsons. Essentially, Joey begins the series with multiple attributes, some positive and some negative, but as the show progresses, his stupidity slowly becomes his only trait. By about midway through the series, virtually every single Joey joke is making fun of how clueless he is in any given situation. Disregarding that it makes no sense why a perfectly healthy adult would mentally regress in the way that Joey seems to, this change in his character slowly makes him harder and harder to like. It's like if you grew up with a friend who always knew just what to say to cheer you up, but as you both grew up, they would keep making the same jokes, referencing the same hilarious events that had happened to both of you years ago, and doing it with absolutely no self-awareness. It's just hard to watch because you still like them, but everything they seem to say and do now annoys you. I sincerely feel bad for Matt LeBlanc, Joey's actor, because he had to play this character for 10 years. Imagine making the same joke over and over for the better part of 10 years, and the fact that they're making fun of your character's intelligence is just salt in the wound. The only bit of what could be considered development for Joey comes in his relationship with Rachel, but I'm hesitant to call this development. Joey falls in love with Rachel, but he doesn't want to act on his feelings since he knows that she has a history with Ross. Joey and Ross have a heart-to-heart about the whole situation, and Ross ends up giving Joey his blessing, even though it still hurts him that Rachel could be with someone else. After a few attempts of acting like a couple, Joey and Rachel realize that they just aren't clicking and they decide to stay friends. I think this arc was a really good idea in concept, but what's so weird about it is that it doesn't really go farther than being a concept. Joey and Rachel end up in the exact same position after their relationship was over as when it started. As much as I dislike how Ross and Rachel's breakup was handled, it did at least have obvious long-lasting effects on their relationship. Now, Joey and Rachel were definitely still in the infancy of their relationship, and they didn't end on bad terms like Ross and Rachel, but you could ultimately remove this subplot and have very little effect on the rest of the story. Ironically, the most significant amount of character development that this relationship generates is in somebody who isn't even a part of it, Ross. Ross recognizing that he is obsessed with Rachel to the point that it hurts him to see her happy in a relationship with someone else, and then deciding that he wants to change, is by far the most progression Ross makes away from a manipulative, paranoid psychopath, even if it is almost completely undercut by the finale. Again, it's not that this arc is bad for Joey, it really isn't anything, and therefore it isn't bad or good, which feels weird considering it was a constant subplot for 2 whole seasons. I guess you could argue that it shows that Joey is capable of true compassionate love and that he's not just motivated by sex, but again, it's not like the show does anything with this. Joey doesn't begin a new long-term relationship after he and Rachel break up, and Joey obviously has that passionate love for his other friends, so there was really no reason to believe that he couldn't have this kind of relationship with a romantic partner. I just find myself thinking, what's the point? And it's unfortunate because, like I said, Joey started off extremely likable, but over time he became easily the weakest member of the cast of Friends. On the flip side, Barney is easily the strongest member of How I Met Your Mother. Okay, he's actually really close to Ted for being my favorite, but I had to say easily for a better transition sentence, which I now realize I have completely nullified the effect of by explaining the logic behind my wording for too long, but whatever, we're keeping it! Barney is almost everything I could possibly hope for out of a sitcom character. He's hilarious, genuinely emotionally endearing, and he's played by a gay actor. It doesn't get any better than that. Jokes aside, I genuinely love Barney's character in How I Met Your Mother because unlike Joey, he evolves as the show goes on, from a borderline cartoon character to one of the most grippingly emotional characters I have ever had the pleasure of watching. Words cannot describe how much I love it when a show is able to be ridiculous and larger than life while also investing me into its core characters as real people without straining my suspension of disbelief. Which I know is a very high bar to set, but How I Met Your Mother clears it with flying colors, and in so many different aspects which I delve into deeper in a later part of this series, but most significantly in Barney Stinson's character arc. As I stated before, Barney begins How I Met Your Mother as a pretty typical playboy with a charming personality, and furthermore, I'd argue that he pulls this off much better than any other sitcom character who fits this archetype because he always takes it to the extreme. He works a high-level corporate job at Goliath National Bank, so he gets paid 16 crap loads a year, which means that he can do virtually anything and have it be justified by the fact that he's incredibly rich. Want to make him have a worldwide business devoted to getting dumb girls to show him their rack? I could believe it. Want to give him a hologram projector? Go for it. Want to give him a guy who gets him a guy for virtually any task you could think of? Totally doable. This gives Barney infinitely more comedy potential than look how stupid this character is. Isn't it funny that this character doesn't know what that word means? Isn't it hilarious that this character can't do grade school level math? And the best part about all of this, the part that makes Barney truly rise above his predecessors, not just Joey, is how his personality and character arc are implemented into his cartoonish, wacky persona. Remember how I said that I love it when a show is able to deliver over-the-top comedy and get me invested into characters at the same time? Well, How I Met Your Mother does this masterfully with Barney by making his ridiculous and intentionally exaggerated personality traits an integral part of his character. You see, Barney is not just wacky and cartoonish for the sake of providing the audience with a joke. Barney himself is acutely aware of how over-the-top his actions are and that they are entertaining to experience, which is exactly why he acts the way he does. As is touched on in a few instances in How I Met Your Mother, Barney's mission statement in life is to make every night legendary. He wants to create super insane and memorable experiences for himself and even more so for his friends.
Whatever you do in this life, it's not legendary unless your friends are there to see it.
You see how it all comes full circle? Barney's seemingly empathy-lacking exterior persona is in fact deeply rooted in some of the most compassionate and empathetic intentions out of any character in the show. And going even further than that, How I Met Your Mother provides a perfect explanation for how Barney acquired this philosophy. As we learn later in the series, Barney's father was a party monster to a potentially even greater extent than Barney, and as a kid, Barney admired him very much for this quality and wanted to emulate it. For God's sakes, Jerome's last words to Barney before walking out of his life were "never stop partying." Of course, with his father gone, Barney's mother seemingly was able to keep his party side under control, and by the way, can I just say, what a fantastic depiction of a single mom. Loretta struggled every single day to take care of her 2 sons, and she didn't do a perfect job by any means, but she tried her hardest and feels genuinely bad that she wasn't able to give Barney and James a better life. Seriously, the scene where Barney says that Loretta was basically 2 parents in one for him would have had me crying if not for the fact that they used his framing of the sentence as a bit of a joke. Still super heartwarming though. There's too much amazing stuff with this character to address in one video, but back to Barney's development. Barney's mother clearly instilled him with some more, let's say, docile attributes than, knocking down a blue whale at a natural history museum. But many years later, upon losing his then-girlfriend to a generic businessman with money and suits, Barney became motivated to get revenge, leading to his taking a job at G&B. Thus, his exorbitant amount of money fueled his inner party animal to finally take the reins, also due likely in no small part to the lifestyle of suits, booze, and strip clubs that he was then exposed to. Barney was a mostly unempathetic, selfish person up until he made friends with the rest of the group, but their presence ended up fueling yet another transformation of Barney into the person we now know him as. Everything about Barney is executed masterfully well, and as the seasons go on, turns him into more and more of an actual person that the audience cares about, all while being incredibly entertaining and, say it with me, not breaking immersion. This is why I said that Barney is barely comparable to Joey. By even halfway through each show, the two of them have taken such drastically different paths in terms of development, to the point that if you showed somebody who had never seen either of these shows before only one of the later seasons of each, the thought that Barney might have been based on Joey would more likely than not never cross their mind. But Barney's excellence doesn't even end there, because now it's time for me to talk about his relationship with Robin. As you might expect by this point, Barney's relationship with Robin parallels Joey's relationship with Rachel on face value, but looking a bit deeper will reveal just how much better it is. First of all, the whole point I had about Joey and Rachel's relationship feeling unnecessary could not apply less to Barney and Robin, as it is very clear that their relationship was planned from the start. There are countless specific moments wherein it's hinted that they might have some attraction to each other as early as season 1, and let me tell you, the build up to them actually getting together is a slow burn. I'm sure that some people didn't like that it took them so long to actually get together given all the hints, and I understand why, but I feel like the long stretch of seasons with nothing more than hints and little romantically or sexually charged interactions between the two were very necessary for their arc to be as powerful as it was. Barney and Robin had not met previous to the show starting, so they effectively started their relationship from ground zero, and I'm glad that they were given enough time to develop a very close friendship before the show launched into romantic subplot mode. And once they actually get together, the consistency of realism remains, well, consistent. As you might expect based on their personalities and what the show has established of them so far at this point in the story, neither of them are very equipped for being in a long-term relationship, or even a very close one at that. As a result, they quickly end up fighting a lot, and after realizing that they are incompatible, they break up on good terms. I love it when a bad couple realizes they're bad for each other and breaks up without any hard feelings. But in a similar manner to what I discussed of Marshall and Lily's arc throughout season 6, Barney and Robin breaking up doesn't just send them right back to being normal friends with no side effects, despite their good intentions. Seeing how Barney is dealing with the breakup, basically sleeping with as many women as possible, makes Robin feel like Barney never really valued their relationship or her, because he doesn't seem sad at all to be separate from her. And upon realizing this, Barney apologizes and makes it up to Robin by letting her and her then-boyfriend Don go on a super date, which Barney was planning to go on with another girl. Again, this goes to show Barney's true compassion for his friends, and it's all wrapped up in a believable, well-executed arc. Now, Barney and Robin do end up getting together again, this time actually getting married, but like with the other two relationships in each of these shows, it takes us until the final episode to get the resolution to that arc, and I'll be saving my points on that for a later section in this analysis. And with all the main relationships in both of these series covered, it's time to move on to the only character I've yet to analyze in these shows, and the only one with no other character for me to compare them with, Phoebe Buffay.
Sometimes men love women, and sometimes men love men. Then there are bisexuals, though some just say they're kidding themselves. La 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 la.
Phoebe is kind of a wild card in Friends, and to be honest, I don't exactly know how to feel about her. A lot of her jokes are about her being an airhead and generally not reading the vibe of the room very well, which I actually was very excited to see get explored later on. She did grow up on the streets after all, so it makes perfect sense that she never got super accustomed to how the middle and upper class generally act and are expected to act. She also makes jokes and comments that often feel inappropriate and that make other characters uncomfortable, and I for one was thoroughly interested. But unfortunately nothing really comes of this. We learn more about her past, namely that her birth mom is actually alive and that her dad had a whole other family, but none of this really seems to affect her person as the seasons go on. There are a few moments where it's hinted that Phoebe is actually a lot smarter than she lets on, which kinda undercuts a bit of this characterization. I suppose I feel similarly about Phoebe on the whole as I do about Joey and his relationship with Rachel. As a specific example, I direct your attention to Phoebe's pregnancy. As it turns out, Phoebe's brother and his fiancée are unable to have kids, and so Phoebe decides to be a surrogate for them. However, after the kids are born, Frank, Phoebe's brother, just takes them and dips out of the show, only to appear in a few rare episodes later on. It just kind of felt like this huge event should have had a bigger impact on who Phoebe was as a person, but she quickly settles back into the same role she served before the pregnancy. Now, I understand that it sounds like I've been pretty critical of Phoebe on the whole, but keep in mind that I'm talking about all of this under the pretense that it was missed opportunity. There is one relationship that I thought was done very well with Phoebe, and that is her relationship with Mike. Mike Hannigan is introduced early on into season 9, and the dynamic he has with Phoebe actually touches on almost all the missed opportunities in Phoebe's character I just described. Mike gets together with Phoebe after a bad divorce, which has caused him to lose faith in the idea of marriage. This becomes a fundamental issue in his and Phoebe's relationship because Phoebe's end goal in her love life is marriage, and they actually split up because of this.
Huh, that seems familiar.
However, Mike ends up changing his mind, and eventually the two of them get engaged and married, and throughout the whole process, Phoebe is blissfully happy that she finally gets to have a normal life, which she hoped to achieve ever since she was a little girl. And the episode where Phoebe and Mike get married is legitimately touching. I will say, however, that none of Phoebe's biggest moments felt as emotionally gripping to me as nearly all of the biggest moments in How I Met Your Mother because, like I mentioned earlier, I feel like her development was a little ignored for the larger part of the series. Not nearly to the degree that Joey's character was, though. Also, there's the fact that Mike's character feels a little thrown in. I mean, plenty of guest stars and one-off characters appear in Friends only for one episode, then just kind of leave afterwards and only reappear every once in a while, so it never quite registered for me that Mike and Phoebe were a serious couple until they got engaged. By and large, though, I would definitely say that I liked Phoebe. Now, you might remember that I said I was glad that Phoebe didn't have a direct character connection in How I Met Your Mother, and now you're confused because I just said that I liked her. Well, dear viewer, that is because the only parts of Phoebe which I thought were genuinely worth adapting and given more expansion were more so ideas that got attached to her character rather than her personality or comedy style, both of which I found a little offsetting. And it seems that the creators of How I Met Your Mother were on the same wavelength as me because they managed to explore the life of one of their characters growing up without a full family in Barney, as I have detailed in this video. And that is what I think really makes the difference between mediocre shows and great ones. Mediocre shows tend to struggle to connect the plot and characters with their theme. Truly great shows are not only able to do this, but they progress the narrative in a way that feels natural and which delivers the core message powerfully. This concludes part 1C of Why How I Met Your Mother is Better Than Friends. Continued in part 2. I've held off discussing the endings of these two shows for quite a while now, and although it was partly a method of artificially inflating anticipation for each new part, it was also because the endings of these shows are particularly interesting. Friends' ending is interesting, at least for me, because it plays out exactly as you would expect it to based on the rest of the show. I mean, like, exactly as you would expect. Chandler and Monica become parents and move into their house in the suburbs together. Phoebe lives happily ever after with Mike. Joey has a new bird, and Ross and Rachel get together once again. Now, I don't want to go in depth about each character's conclusion because, like I said, they are basically just the logical and thematic continuations of their characters up until this point, and I've already talked about each of their arcs individually. I will say that it's heartwarming to see Chandler and Monica finally start a family after all their struggles to do so. It's wonderful to see Phoebe end up with Mike, and, well, Joey kinda got shafted. I do want to give special attention to Ross and Rachel, however, because the last few episodes not only accentuate the biggest problem in their arc, but serves as a fascinating turning point in Western television as a whole. So basically, Rachel gets offered an amazing job in Paris and is intent on pursuing it. Meanwhile, Ross continually and secretly visits her old boss and attempts to get him to offer Rachel more money to keep her current job. Despite the fact that her job in Paris is a huge opportunity for her and would give her the luxury of moving to Paris, something which she's obviously excited about, Ross does everything in his power to prevent her from accomplishing that dream that she set out to achieve in the beginning of the series. All of this simply because he's in love with her and he can't bear the idea of not having her in his life. I've gone over it before, so I'll just say that this is clearly possessive and controlling behavior by Ross, and it makes it incredibly hard to root for him. Despite this, I'm sure that there are many people who are saying that this criticism isn't valid because upon Rachel deciding to stay in New York for the money that Ross convinced her boss to offer her, Ross, seeing how excited Rachel was about going to Paris, tells her to go instead of taking the higher paying job in New York because it's what she wants. Sounds just like what I praised Ted for in the first part of this video series, right? Well, yes, however, the key difference in Ross's case for why this moment does not forgive his actions is because this is the home stretch of the show and Ross has not progressed at all since the moment he first saw Rachel. He's actually gotten a lot worse. But more importantly, Ross has failed to learn this exact lesson in the past multiple times, and as a result, the conceit that Ross has grown as a person here rings completely hollow, and what do you know, Ross backpedals after Rachel's going away party just 2 episodes later. All of a sudden, he once again can't stand not being with her, so he rushes after her to the airport to confess his love. Even after 10 seasons of will they won't they waffling, Friends insists on beating this dead horse of a subplot further and further into the ground as it nears its conclusion. And the real cherry on top of all of this is that Ross is rewarded for his actions. Rachel suddenly realizes that she loves Ross too and rushes back to his apartment where they at long last consummate their love and get together once again. I've said it before and I'll say it again, Friends teaches its audience that love is the end-all be-all when that is not only an incorrect message but a straight-up harmful one. Allow me to elaborate. Ross only gets together with Rachel because he confronts her with how much he loves her and she reciprocates, and all of this happens despite the fact that they have broken up multiple times in the past for very good reason. Imagine, if you will, an actual real-life man who is in love with his ex-girlfriend who is about to move far away from the town or city they both live in. The man confesses his love to the woman and she insists that she has to leave because that's what would be best for her. Now imagine that the girl didn't magically change her mind despite logic pointing in the other direction and rush back into the man's arms. The man, if he had taken the theme of Friends to heart, would likely feel extremely cheated and could very easily incubate an extremely negative mentality towards the girl even though she did nothing wrong. I know this is an extreme example, but I use it to illustrate a point. That point simply being that Friends has, in my humble opinion, a bad theme, which I believe is the result of its insistence on pushing the power of love message and forcing 2 characters together at the end of the show. Now, you may remember that I mentioned that Friends marks an interesting turning point in Western television, and I believe that this is exactly it. Friends was massively popular. The airing of its finale had over 50 million US viewers, so it's no surprise that it was a little influential. Quite a few sitcoms, movies, and even cartoons following Friends pulled the last-second relationship trick, and it usually ends up not being that great due to a lot of the same criticisms I've had of Ross and Rachel's ending. Even my favorite media piece of all time, Avatar: The Last Airbender, does this trope, and although Aang and Katara most certainly do not make a bad couple, they still do feel like the obvious ship for the series. It can become annoying seeing their relationship get constantly hinted at while the audience just waits until the last episode for the show to tell them what they already know is going to happen. And I bring up the influence Friends had not only because it's interesting, but because I think it's exactly why the original ending to How I Met Your Mother is so hated. Up until this point, everything I've said about How I Met Your Mother has been under the pretense that I'm talking about the show's alternative ending, and I'm sure there's at least a few people who are confused by this. Basically, after the huge amount of backlash the creators received when How I Met Your Mother aired its original ending, they recut an alternative ending for the Season 9 DVD, which most audience members agree greatly improved upon the initial finale. But why was the original ending so hated? Why have I made it a point not to discuss it up until now? And why is it significantly worse than the ending of Friends?
This needs to stop now. This is cancer. This is so much cancer that I can feel the tumors growing on my back.
The final season of How I Met Your Mother takes place on Barney and Robin's wedding weekend for the first 22 episodes, and for the last 2 are spent flashing forward in time to the gang's biggest moments in the 15 years between Barney and Robin's wedding and the present day when Ted is telling his kids this story. The first 22 episodes feature many glimpses into Ted and Tracy, the mothers, life together, and in the final 2 episodes we see them grow into the couple they had been built up to for the past 9 seasons. And everything is capped off with one last speech by Ted about love. One last speech about how lucky he is to have met Tracy McConnell. One last speech about how much he loved her. loved. Past tense. In one line of dialogue, future Ted, our narrator, undoes the entirety of his arc as we learn that the mother contracted a serious illness 6 years before when he is telling his kids this story. And she dies. The mother, the character that the fans had been awaiting for 9 seasons, the character that had been the light at the end of Ted's increasingly dark tunnel of life as the show goes on. We see Ted and Tracy at their wedding. Happy, nostalgic music is playing in the background. Ted is describing how much he loves Tracy and how much he knew he had to spend every moment of his life loving her as much as he possibly could. And then it all comes crumbling to the ground with just 4 words.
And I carried it with me when she got sick.
This is seriously depressing shit. How I Met Your Mother has never been afraid to throw tragedy at its characters, but that tragedy was always followed up by how the characters got through it. And while there are 5 minutes left in the episode after we learn of Tracy's passing, the finale does not choose to show us how Ted deals with the passing of his wife like many of the other tragic moments in the show. It does something worse. Much worse. Ted, in these last 2 minutes of the show's runtime, gets back together with Robin. Oh yeah, Barney and Robin got divorced. I'll talk about that later. This moment to me can only be described as pure disaster, a betrayal, dare I say it, a slap in the face. There is a wonderful video made by the channel Entertain the Elk that I think does a great job at encapsulating why this ending was so hated, so I'd recommend watching that video. The long and short of it, though, is that throughout the show, the audience is repeatedly shown why Ted and Robin are not right for each other, but Craig Thomas and Carter Bays, the creators of How I Met Your Mother, initially wanted Robin and Ted to end up together. And in order to not have Ted's kids look much older when the finale was aired, they recorded it in advance during the production of season 2, assuming that Robin and Ted would be romantic endgame by the end of the show. This is why Ted inexplicably has a change of heart in the last 2 minutes of the show. It's why Barney and Robin get divorced. It's why Tracy, the character that was supposed to be Ted's long-awaited happily ever after, gets killed off in the name of following the trend which was set by Friends. I know how negative this is all going to sound, but in a way, Friends is the biggest problem in How I Met Your Mother. The absolutely astonishing influence Friends had on the Western television industry as a whole crept its way into the production of How I Met Your Mother and locked it into an ending that would go against the entirety of the story. Obviously, I'm not saying that Friends is the reason that How I Met Your Mother has a bad ending, though. It was Craig and Thomas who chose to follow the last-minute relationship trope, so the blame ultimately falls on them. I just can't help but feel like if Friends didn't end in the way it did, How I Met Your Mother wouldn't have had such an atrocious ending. I mean, the fact that they felt the need to make an alternate ending at all tells you just how poorly it was received. But what about that alternate ending? Instead of Ted narrating about how much he loved Tracy, in the alternate ending, future Ted reminisces about the long road that led him towards meeting Tracy and all the biggest events that took place on that road. Most importantly though, Tracy does not die. This one simple change takes the depressing original ending and turns it into the one we were always supposed to get, and the one which I have been discussing and will continue to discuss throughout this video series. Ted was always supposed to end up with Tracy. His entire arc was about him enduring everything life sent his way so that he could finally meet the mother of his children. There are so many individual moments where Ted demonstrates his emotional resilience, and each one serves to build up the reveal of the mother by emphasizing all the shit Ted had to go through to get where he is now. And by season 9, Ted is nothing short of worn down. He has taken so much for so long, and now, even though he wants Robin to be happy with Barney, he can't help but feel hurt that Robin won't end up with him. As a result, Ted decides to leave New York and move to Chicago to get a fresh start on life, and I cannot emphasize how amazing this decision was for the writers. This is because, based on the previous 8 seasons, having Ted leave the group for this reason feels completely organic, strengthens his characterization as wanting the best for Robin no matter how much it hurts him, and generates the most dramatic weight possible, which is exactly what you want for a series finale. And amazingly, the show is able to basically brush off this plot point, having Ted decide to stay in New York and not have it feel like it was a waste of time, because all the building blocks leading to this turn in the plot were set up during season 9. Ted makes peace with Barney, realizes through Lily that he truly loves living in New York, and finally lets go of Robin. Meeting Tracy is just the catalyst for his decision to stay because every other reason he had for leaving has now been resolved. To put it simply, How I Met Your Mother sets up Ted's happily ever after nearly flawlessly, and with the alternate ending actually follows through on that promise. It really is just solid storytelling on a structural basis. And it leads to a heartwarming emotional payoff on par with some of my favorite films and TV shows of all time, due in no small part to the phenomenal casting and acting. It brings me that classic feeling of happily ever after that I thought I had left behind as a kid, securing this show that I had already loved to death as one of my favorite pieces of media ever. And still, Barney and Robin get divorced. Even in this alternative ending that I have been praising for being heartwarming, Barney and Robin don't get their happily ever after together. And this is likely the biggest remaining criticism most fans have of How I Met Your Mother, as Barney and Robin remain separated even in the alternative ending. Season 9 took place almost exclusively during Barney and Robin's wedding weekend and had multiple episodes wherein they were presented with the possibility that their relationship might not last. The poker game, the rehearsal dinner, and end of the aisle are all great examples of this. In each, Barney and Robin worry for one reason or another that they don't make a very good couple, but by the end of the episode they have resolved that worry and oftentimes taught the audience a lesson in the process.
I've decided to make only one vow to you, because it's the only one that really counts. From this day forward, I am always going to be honest with you, because I love you.
And it is because the show spent so much time reassuring the audience that they would stand the test of time by showing how the two of them got past each of these smaller conflicts that it is especially unfortunate that they ended up separated. However, I would like to acknowledge what Barney and Robin's conclusion contributes to How I Met Your Mother thematically, that being the prevailing sense of realism. Yes, it sucks that Barney and Robin couldn't make it work, but sometimes that's just the way the cookie crumbles. And it's not like their divorce comes out of nowhere or doesn't make sense. They actually split up for the same reason nearly every single one of Robin's past relationships failed, that being her career. With Barney evolving into someone who values a lifelong partner and Robin getting promoted to worldwide news anchor, they become increasingly unhappy with their relationship because Robin spends so much time traveling and it's too much of a hassle to have Barney come with. Barney, keeping the vow he made to Robin at their wedding, tells her that he feels like he would be happier if they were not together, and Robin reciprocates. It's just as Ted narrates in the alternate ending.
It was life. Stuff happens in life. Things fall apart. Things get put back together.
And that is what How I Met Your Mother is a story about. Life. The highs, the lows, and everything in between. It is what makes this a show that connected with so many people. It is what makes it so distinct from its predecessors, and is what makes these characters feel like real people. And I absolutely acknowledge that this same mindset can be applied to the original ending. Death will be just as common in most people's lives as divorce, more so in fact. And I also absolutely understand liking the original ending because it could be seen as arguably more realistic. But I think that the alternative ending does this well while also managing to leave the audience on a happy note. It fits itself between realism and idealism, and in my experience of observing the conversation surrounding the original and alternative endings of How I Met Your Mother, whether you think that either of these endings is too negative or too unrealistic, or that one of them strikes a perfect balance between the two, will depend on the individual. Personally, I think that although it makes sense why Barney and Robin broke up, it would have made for a much better ending if they had stayed together, because the show already has plenty of realism in it without the divorce, and it wouldn't strain my suspension of disbelief for Robin's career to not be a problem in their relationship. Furthermore, keeping them together would prevent Barney's biggest character arc from taking a massive blow. After the divorce, Barney falls right back into his old womanizing ways. He hits on girls half his age, he creates a new playbook, he attempts and completes a perfect month, sleeping with 30 different women in 30 days. The only bit of progression he receives in the finale is in becoming a father. The 30th girl he slept with during his perfect month gets pregnant and has a child. That's about the extent of it. This feels extremely thrown in at the last minute, but despite this, it does finally, once and for all, end Barney's womanizing ways. It's sad that his relationship with Barney ultimately wasn't the motivation for this change in his character, and it is incredibly rushed, but at the very least, it's better to have Barney move forward with his life instead of completely regressing back into his former self. The alternate ending to How I Met Your Mother is by no means perfect, but I can confidently say that even with its flaws, it manages to outdo the finale of Friends overall. Where I felt that Friends' only real positive, emotionally powerful conclusion came in the form of Monica and Chandler's arc, I feel much more strongly about Ted and Tracy and Marshall and Lily's endings. The only ending I felt negative about was Barney's, and I was pretty indifferent towards Robin's. And unfortunately, I can't say that I liked most of Friends' character conclusions. I already went over my thoughts on Ross and Rachel, I'm indifferent towards Phoebe, and I felt like Joey really got the short end of the stick. His friends are moving away, his relationship with Rachel didn't work out, and his career as an actor never really took off, and it's probably going to be really hard to get that to happen after his agent Estelle died. I find it very strange that both of these shows somehow managed to accidentally fall into such melancholy finales despite their nature as sitcoms, you know, situational comedies. I mean, as much as I've praised How I Met Your Mother for being able to bring such strong emotions out of me, I would not have gotten past the first episode if the jokes sucked. Same thing applies to Friends. At each step of these shows' journeys, they had to keep the audience laughing, and they largely succeeded in that, meaning that the creators had their eye on what the backbone of their show was. These shows are supposed to make you happy. They're supposed to endear you into the characters and give those characters conflicts to deal with, followed by having the characters get through them as better people. But unfortunately, I can't say that either of these shows' endings fully lives up to that standard. This concludes part 2 of Why How I Met Your Mother is Better Than Friends, continued in part 3. Both How I Met Your Mother and Friends are TV shows which are rooted in comedy. There are almost no scenes in either of them that pass without a joke being made, and while most audience members agree that both of these shows are funny, I don't see very many people making an effort to understand why these shows are funny. Which I think is a shame, because when you really pay attention to it, the comedy in each of these shows offers a lot of insight into not only the thought process of the show creators themselves, but the audience that each of these shows appealed to. On the one hand, you have Friends, which is made up almost exclusively of wordplay jokes. Someone will almost always make a sarcastic remark in any given conversation, or frame their sentence in a way that sets up for a punchline. It's very formulaic and consistent, because you can apply this style of humor to any situation the characters might find themselves in, and the audience doesn't need context to get it. Playing a poker game, getting married, or just sitting around at the coffee house. Any scene in which the characters are talking is free real estate for jokes. On the other hand, you have How I Met Your Mother, which also largely consists of wordplay humor, but instead of making light of whatever is happening at the current moment, characters in How I Met Your Mother will frequently refer to events that happened from earlier in the episode, or even from previous episodes. If you were to take someone who had never seen How I Met Your Mother before and ask them to watch an episode from halfway through the series, they would probably have a few chuckles, but the extra meaning behind each joke or reference to previous seasons would be lost on them. And I'm not even just talking about whenever Ranjit says, "Hello!" On a line-by-line basis, each character has their own style. It's hard to put into words, but it's like every time the character talks, you think, of course they would say that. Now, this does make How I Met Your Mother slightly less accessible than Friends, which you can really just turn on at any point in the series and have the same experience as if you were watching the episodes in order. However, I think this change was well worth it and adds a lot more than it takes away, because thanks to this manner of line delivery, How I Met Your Mother has a constant air of evolution, building on top of its past experiences just like in real life. In contrast, Friends is less personal. It doesn't feel as though we're watching real people, but instead a group of archetypes. Funny archetypes, but archetypes nonetheless. And it is for this reason that I prefer How I Met Your Mother's style of comedy out of the two. But if How I Met Your Mother does a better job at delivering the comedy in situational comedy, why is Friends so much more popular? Why, if How I Met Your Mother is able to have consistently higher highs than Friends, is it not the lasting poster child of this genre of television? Well, this is just a theory, but I believe the answer lies in the timeline. Think about it. Friends was aired in the mid-90s, right when technology in the modern American home was becoming more accessible than ever.
Technology is about to go crazy.
Basically, Friends came onto television at a time in which more and more people were buying televisions and looking for ways to fit them into their daily routines, and Friends, with its consistent popcorn entertainment value, fulfilled that service perfectly. I have no doubt in my mind that millions of Americans would get home after work every day and turn on Friends just to have something to watch. I mean, it's pretty much exactly what people do with services like Netflix and Hulu now. The only difference is that now we can choose from thousands of shows and we can choose what order to watch them in. But back then, whichever episode was playing when you turned on the TV was the one you got, and the creators of Friends, David Crane and Marta Kaufman, were certainly aware of this. It explains why Friends was so formulaic. They knew that they needed to create a show that didn't need to be watched chronologically and that you could pay little attention to while still being entertained, and they certainly succeeded in doing this. But I think they had to make a lot of compromises to the narrative in order to make that happen, namely in how little the characters evolve as the show goes on. But How I Met Your Mother was not bound by a release schedule. Well, it initially was, but my point is that it was born into an era where streaming services and the internet were already a thing. Online news articles, social media, and other forms of instant communication meant that for fans of the show, keeping up to date with the plot was not a matter of fitting the show into your schedule, but simply searching it up online if you really wanted to know. Unfortunately, I believe that this also came with a downfall. Because How I Met Your Mother was released in this age, it had fierce competition with other shows of the time, and it was a lot harder for many people to fit it into their routine, so they never really got hooked. The market crash might have also had something to do with it, I don't know, probably not. My point is that How I Met Your Mother, just like Friends, was crafted in a way that reflected the culture it was created in, and while I think that this led to fewer viewers, I also think it made for a better overall product. Because How I Met Your Mother could and can be easily viewed in order, it becomes much more rewarding for the viewer to continually pay attention to it, whereas I don't think this quality is as present in Friends. And I think this provides some insight into what kind of person each of these shows appeals to. Fans of How I Met Your Mother tend to cite its realistic and emotionally powerful depictions of its characters for why they love it, and people generally love Friends because they feel it's more lighthearted, easier to put on in the background, and funnier. Whether a show is funny or not is of course a very subjective topic though. One point I've held off on bringing up yet, despite its relevance to my analysis of these shows' comedy, is the presence of a narrator in How I Met Your Mother, which is yet another way that the show delivers some punchlines. The reason I haven't discussed it up until now is because having future Ted narrate the story we are watching is possibly the single best thing the show does for itself, and the comedy is just one example of why it works so well. The sitcom genre is an easy genre to do well. If the jokes are funny, there you go, you have a good sitcom, but it's a very hard genre to do spectacularly. It is very hard to take a genre that is centered around making the audience laugh and get them invested in the characters as they would real people, because real life isn't just a series of hilarious events and one-liners, especially the kind that are commonplace in these types of shows. How I Met Your Mother is able to utilize those classic sarcastic remarks and exaggerated reactions to their fullest because of many reasons, but I believe the biggest is because of the presence of its narrator. Future Ted is telling his kids, and by extension the audience, the story of how he met their mother. The reason this is so important is because it means that everything we see on screen can be taken with a grain of salt. The show feels free to have Ted interrupt the episode to include some important bit of information, or change the appearance of a character or object to better reflect how it felt to be there in that moment, or even to intentionally censor parts of the story for his kids. The thing is that we are most of the time being shown what actually happened. I mean, it's not very likely Ted would have been telling his kids all the vivid details of, for example, what Marshal was thinking about while having sex with Lily to help him last longer. Because it's never explicitly stated in the show, the viewer gets to decide whether they think whatever's happening on screen is what actually happened, or if future Ted is just exaggerating. And no matter what the audience decides to think is really the case, your suspension of disbelief is never strained, which is why we can have ridiculous stuff like this happen.
You okay, sweetie?
Actually, baby, my throat's a bit sore.
Insert clip of Marshal breakdancing. We can even have the characters look directly at the camera for a gag and still have the immersion of the show remain intact. Furthermore, the narrator plays a key component in another aspect of the show's comedy, which is its editing. How I Met Your Mother uses a lot of editing for a sitcom. The show makes nearly constant use of freeze frames to have Ted talk over what's happening, cutting from one setting to another setting with the same characters, or just straight up special effects for the sake of comedy. And it works incredibly well because the audience isn't being asked to believe that this is what's actually happening. Unfortunately, Friends was made in an age where editing like this wasn't really an option simply because of the technology limitations at the time, and I think this plays a role in why it often relies on the same predictable type of wordplay humor. It is often funny, but it clearly doesn't allow for the type of variety and creativity that How I Met Your Mother has access to. Another reason Friends wasn't able to use much complicated editing was because of how they recorded the episodes, which was in front of a live audience. You can't have the characters freeze in place and have the audience laugh at something the narrator said while everyone remains in the same room. Same thing applies to all the special effects stuff I just talked about. And this is why I think that when creating How I Met Your Mother, Thomas and Bays chose to record the show with no live audience and to dub in the laugh track during editing. And this was an absolutely genius move for the show, not only because it allows them to make for funnier jokes, but it allows them to give the jokes that aren't as funny an appropriate amount of laughter. Laugh tracks are often made fun of in sitcoms for being overbearing, repetitive, and annoying. We all know what it's like to have one of the characters on screen make a decently funny remark and then be forced to sit through a tsunami of laughter completely ill-fitting of the joke. It got to the point that sitcoms which didn't use a laugh track like Malcolm in the Middle and The Office were immediately given extra credit for not taking the viewer out of the experience by telling them, "You should be laughing right now," every 30 seconds. But for How I Met Your Mother, this is a non-issue. The actors aren't hearing anyone laugh, so they don't pause for an eternity after making every little remark, and this makes it far less likely that the laugh track will intrude on the viewer's watching experience because it always has to be quiet enough that you can still hear the characters talking. Furthermore, the editors could manage which jokes got little chuckles out of the audience and which ones got those huge waves of laughter based on how funny the joke was, so it never feels like How I Met Your Mother is trying to tell you when to laugh. This is why there aren't any How I Met Your Mother but without the laugh track videos on YouTube. They wouldn't have nearly as much of a difference to the real show as other sitcoms like Friends do.
What do you mean last night? Nothing happened last night. Ross invited us all to watch. What is the matter with you?
We weren't gonna miss our friends getting married.
Who got married?
While some shows choose to include a laugh track and some choose not to, I think that How I Met Your Mother strikes a perfect middle ground. It makes use of the lighthearted atmosphere which the laugh track provides while preventing it from undercutting its most emotionally powerful scenes. And I know this isn't really connected to the topic of this video, but I just need to add that the sound design of How I Met Your Mother overall is phenomenal. I don't know anything about music, so I can't really explain why it's so good, so I figured I'm just gonna play some clips of my favorite musical moments from the show and hope my message gets across. So here you go.
I would walk 500 miles and I would walk 500 miles.
To score a 10 would be just fine, but I'd rather be dressed to the nines. For the longest time.
Be careful.
Everybody lived in class, 'cause it was awesome. So awesome. The way that you just got slashed. Oh, yeah.
For Barney, the second that would never end was this one. You know the thing I do first.
And life will raise me.
This concludes part 3 of Why How I Met Your Mother is Better Than Friends. Now for a bonus segment where I revisit my discussion of How I Met Your Mother's ending, which I talked about in the last video, so consider this section part 2B. So while I was editing the last video, I got to a section where I had to use footage from a video called The Day How I Met Your Mother Died by a channel called Entertain the Elk. Now imagine my surprise when I came across another video called The Day How I Met Your Mother Died, in all caps. As you might expect, I was interested, to say the least, so I checked it out. The Day How I Met Your Mother Died by V and Fuso is a critique of the final season of How I Met Your Mother. Obviously, this video relates to the last section of this video series, and V and Fuso brought up a lot of very interesting points which I feel obligated to give my take on, considering I'm supposed to be making a comprehensive analysis of these two shows. Now, if you've seen this video, you can probably guess that I have more than a couple disagreements with it, but since I don't want to start any drama and I'm trying to focus on just the ending, that's what I'm gonna do. A major point made in this video is that the alternative ending to the show doesn't matter at all because it isn't canon, and therefore anything it might have fixed in the story is ultimately null and void. And now that I think about it, I realize that this is probably an opinion which a lot of people share, and you know what? I can't fault anyone for thinking this way. What I would like to do instead is explain why I and so many other people feel differently. Essentially, from my point of view, the alternative ending is just as canon as the original. It was recorded, edited, and released on DVDs just like every other episode of the show. And I think this gets at a fundamental way of looking at fictional TV shows, or just stories on the whole. Should we, as viewers, accept only what was first shown to us as the correct story? Should we accept whatever makes the most sense based on the rest of the narrative, which was left unchanged? Should we pick and choose what versions of the story we like best? I don't know. When we don't have a definitive statement from the creator of the intellectual property, I don't think we can say that anyone is right or wrong in their interpretation of an alternate take on a story. Personally, I fall into the what makes the most sense based on the rest of the story camp, and this actually leads into V and Fuso's next point, which is
No, this ending doesn't fix anything. If anything, it only leads to more questions.
He then goes on to give a few examples of moments in the show that indicate or foreshadow the mother's death, implying that because the alternate ending contradicts these, it shouldn't be considered canon, or at least that it's not as good as many fans make it out to be. Once again, I find this argument very interesting because there are surely a lot of people who feel the same way, as evident by the numerous videos about scenes that foreshadow the mother's death. My issue with this, however, is that it's almost completely speculative, and as such, it's up to interpretation. You could speculate a reason for any one of these moments to occur that fits with the alternative ending instead of the original, and the simple premise of the show encourages viewers to think this way. Let me use an example to illustrate my point. In the episode The Time Travelers, there's a pretty famous scene wherein we see a hypothetical Ted go to Tracy's apartment and tell her about the life they're going to live together and how excited he is for this. Specifically, he says,
"All that is 45 days away. But I'm here now, I guess because I want this extra 45 days. With you, I want each one of them."
A lot of people look at this as a hint that Tracy would die, since Ted seems to really value his time with her. But when I watched this scene, my immediate thought was that this just illustrates how much Ted loves Tracy. That's similar to how Marshall and Lily, even after being together for roughly a decade, couldn't bear to spend a single night apart. Ted loves Tracy so much that any extra time at all spent with her is worth the world to him. There's also the fact that he says he'll love Tracy to the end of his days and beyond, which seems to imply that they would stay together until Ted dies, and the fact that this whole scene is hypothetical, as future Ted says, "You know the first thing I'd do," to his kids before we see him rush off to Tracy's apartment, implying that he's not actually telling this part of the story. I could go on. And you can apply this type of thinking to every hint that the mother would die and that Ted and Robin would get back together. There's a reason why there is a disagreement between people who think the alternate ending is canon and people who think that it isn't, and it's not because one side is wrong and one side is right. It's because it is never outright stated by the show. As I said, there's a lot more that V and Fuso said in his video, and despite my disagreements with some of his points, I'm still glad that I watched it, and I encourage all of you to do so as well, because I want as many opinions to be heard as possible in this discussion. This concludes part 2B of Why How I Met Your Mother is Better Than Friends. Hopefully I won't have to shove a mini part of this series into an already existing part in the future. Throughout the process of making the other entries in this analysis, I have cataloged and explained every major reason that I prefer How I Met Your Mother over Friends, but I have largely ignored the most common criticism of How I Met Your Mother in this discussion. That criticism being that How I Met Your Mother copied Friends. In this video, I am going to thoroughly break down all the reasons why this argument is complete bullshit. To get you all to understand why I disagree so heavily with this statement, I've decided to try to tackle it from every angle. First, I'll talk about it at face value, dealing with why How I Met Your Mother did not copy Friends. Second, I will explain and rebut the implications of this statement, and third, I will detail why the core reasoning behind this argument is fundamentally flawed. I shouldn't need to discuss this first point very much, since a large part of my comparison of these two shows has dealt with what How I Met Your Mother does differently from Friends and why I prefer those changes. Changes like having Marshall and Lily get engaged in episode 1, Barney being cartoonishly rich, and the complete absence of a version 2 of Phoebe. Stuff like this fundamentally changes the direction the show will take and the tone it will carry throughout its run. Stating that How I Met Your Mother copied Friends when so much of the show is so different makes me wonder, were you paying attention? And I don't mean this to sound condescending, I legitimately question if people who make this argument are forgetting about many of How I Met Your Mother's most crucial differences from Friends, and the effects that those differences have on the final product. What's more is that I don't blame anyone for thinking this way. I mentioned in my last video that Friends fulfilled the role of popcorn entertainment for a lot of its viewers, and that it didn't need to be paid much attention to in order to be enjoyed. And while this is a perfectly valid method of consuming media, I don't think it's the optimal method of consuming How I Met Your Mother, because doing so will cause you to miss a lot of what's under the surface. And a lot of that stuff is what I've been discussing up until now. But I know that at least some of the people saying How I Met Your Mother copied Friends aren't saying that How I Met Your Mother doesn't do anything differently from Friends. They are saying that How I Met Your Mother takes many of the same characters, plot points, and settings as Friends, and that therefore it took less skill to make How I Met Your Mother. And at the very least, I can better understand this point than saying How I Met Your Mother did nothing different from Friends. However, I also don't agree with it. Yes, it is true that How I Met Your Mother uses many of the same elements that Friends does, and this is definitely not a coincidence, but it uses those elements in very different ways, which I would make the argument required a lot of skill to write for. Put simply, although many of the same events that take place in Friends also take place in How I Met Your Mother, the context and implication of those events on the narrative are very, very different. Things like Ted and Robin getting together and breaking up parallel Ross and Rachel's on-again, off-again relationship, but only on the surface. Ted and Robin's relationship largely goes off without a hitch until it becomes apparent that their life goals are completely in contrast. On the other hand, Friends shows us that Ross and Rachel are simply not compatible on a fundamental personality level. Rachel has no plans to move out of the country or even the city throughout the vast majority of the show, and so she and Ross could very feasibly maintain a steady relationship while they both pursue their individual dreams. But because Ross becomes too overbearing and possessive of Rachel, their relationship gradually goes downhill. Ted and Robin broke up out of circumstance, Ross and Rachel broke up out of incompatibility. And you might be thinking, whatever, they both accomplished the same thing. But because of the difference in methodology here, Ross and Rachel become extremely spiteful towards each other after their breakup, which forces the audience to decide who they think holds the moral victory, and thus which character to start disliking. This is not at all helped by the fact that a running joke is made of the "we were on a break" situation, which reminds the viewer of who they felt was in the wrong and that they are still hung up on it. Ted and Robin, on the other hand, become very good friends after their breakup, given there is a brief period of jealousy and awkwardness, but honestly, that just makes it seem more realistic. And it is due to this change that How I Met Your Mother can not only uphold the conceit of our 5 main characters as friends, but it can bring up the subplot of Ted having feelings for Robin in a way that is far more believable than Ross and Rachel's will they won't they waffling. The reason Ted was constantly hung up on Robin was not that he was being an idiot and couldn't see that they didn't make a good couple like Ross, but instead that he knew that if the one issue, which was Robin's career, were to be solved, they would be a perfect match for each other. You want another example? Well, how about the very ends of each of these series, wherein one of the main characters plans to move away but ends up staying because they discovered the love of their life. In Friends, Rachel is offered a job in Paris that she sees as a huge opportunity for her, but decides to remain in New York because she realizes that she loves Ross and wants to give their relationship another shot. In How I Met Your Mother, Ted plans to move to Chicago but ends up staying in New York because he meets Tracy and instantly falls in love with her. The same thing happens in both shows at the same point in the series, so How I Met Your Mother totally copied Friends, right? Well, it may seem like it on the surface, but again, the devil is in the details, specifically in why both Ted and Rachel plan to move and subsequently subsequently why they decide not to. Rachel is going to Paris because of the job opportunity. She says herself that she has gotten pretty much everything she can out of her job at Bloomingdale, and that this is basically the job she has been dreaming of getting ever since the start of the series. She then chooses to stay because Ross confronts her with his feelings, and after thinking about it, Rachel decides that she feels the same way. On the other hand, Ted is moving because he feels that he and Robin have too much history together for him to be comfortable with her marrying Barney, but he doesn't want things to be weird between the three of them once Barney and Robin get back from their honeymoon. And he decides to stay because after falling in love with Tracy, he no longer wishes to be with Robin, thus making his reason to leave completely obsolete. In this situation, it's just like what I said about the main love interests breaking up, but in reverse. This time, Rachel is leaving due to circumstance, and Ted is leaving because his relationship with Robin and Barney would make all of them unhappy. And this key distinction not only leads to completely different romantic endgames for each of these shows, but completely different themes and tones as well. Because Rachel decides to stay despite the fact that it made more sense for her to move, and that her reasoning for staying is so unsatisfying, see my complaints of the Friends finale for more detail, Rachel's conclusion can best be described as uncomfortable. Conversely, Ted stays because a new and promising opportunity for happiness is presented to him, and the audience knows for a fact that Tracy is the perfect match for Ted, rather than a ship that has already sunk multiple times. This makes How I Met Your Mother's ending far more satisfying and simply heartwarming. I mean, I shouldn't have to explain why it's better to actually feel confident that the main character is going to have a successful relationship after the series is over. The only instances wherein I think it's clear that How I Met Your Mother did something extremely similar to Friends and didn't change anything to make it feel distinct are either one-off or running jokes. Things like no one knowing what Chandler or Barney are doing for a living, the majority of the main group living right above the hangout spot, or the fact that they both take place in New York City. These kinds of things don't have major story ramifications, and in some cases, How I Met Your Mother is actually deliberately parodying Friends, like in how the same actor plays a character on both shows who gets dumped by Ross and Ted on her birthday, or when Barney says,
"Hanging out at a coffee place, not nearly as much fun as hanging out at a bar."
I could give countless more examples, but I think you get the point. When looking at similarities in these shows, you have to factor in the execution and context of those similarities instead of just looking at them in a vacuum. It's not enough to just say that because some events in How I Met Your Mother are similar as some events that happen in Friends, it must have copied its predecessor. But you know what? Let's say that this is the case. Let's say that the creators of How I Met Your Mother do not have nearly as much skill in creating an appealing sitcom as the creators of Friends do, and that they only were able to make How I Met Your Mother the way it is because they were ripping off Friends. Even then, I would maintain that How I Met Your Mother is still better than Friends. And to illustrate my point, I ask you, why does copying make something worse? Because here's the thing, I don't care who did it first, I care who did it better. Even if literally everything about these two shows was the same, but How I Met Your Mother was recorded in higher video quality, I would still be sitting here telling you that it's better. It just wouldn't take me an hour and a half to do so. If you want to make the argument that the creators of Friends deserve more credit than the creators of How I Met Your Mother, I can totally understand why you would think that. I may not agree with that statement, but I can at the very least understand the reasoning behind it. However, what I don't understand is stating that whether or not a piece of media is copied or not affects its quality. If someone were to walk up to me on the street and hold up the Friends DVD collection next to the How I Met Your Mother DVD collection and ask me, which of these do you think I will enjoy watching more, I will tell them How I Met Your Mother any day of the week. Throughout the process of me making this comparison of these two shows, I have asked myself on several occasions, why am I doing this? Isn't it enough that I have my opinion about these shows and that if I like one of them more than the other, I should just watch the one I like more? My wondering this may be in part a result of being asked this very question on countless occasions by commenters on that 5-minute video I made on just this topic, which I mentioned in part 1 of this series. Not to mention the dozens of people telling me to just stop watching Steven Universe Future since I seem to hate every aspect of it and think it's a burning pile of garbage that I only like making fun of because I want to ruin it for everyone else. But regardless, the answer that I have landed on is that I want to feel heard. I want my thoughts to be acknowledged and understood by as many people as possible, and I want to hear their thoughts as well. This is why I make an effort to at least skim all of my comments. It's why I try to give as much detail as I feel is necessary to communicate my message no matter how much time and effort it takes, because I value being heard. And I know that other people feel the same way. Other people who are probably watching this video right now and thinking, finally, someone who understands me. Someone who has proven that I'm not the only one who thinks this way. Or better yet, this person has put words to an idea that I could not. That is why I do all of this. That's why this video series exists. That's why all the other videos on this channel exist, and it's why all future videos on this channel will exist. The only question I have left is, are you going to listen? I hope you enjoyed this video series. I had a lot of fun putting it together, and it makes me super happy to see that other people have enjoyed it just as much. I'd love to say stick around for more content like this, but honestly, I upload content about pretty much any media I consume, which means a lot of anime and cartoons, so if that's not really your thing, I'm at least glad that you were able to get something out of this series. To be honest, there are quite a few random little things I didn't touch on about each of these shows, which I could have filled an entire other video with, but I feel like I've made my overall point in a satisfying manner. I guess I shouldn't have expected to put that text box on screen and not have people ask me to elaborate about my take on these shows' queer characters, so here you go. Surprise, surprise, I think How I Met Your Mother does it way better than Friends. This is simply because How I Met Your Mother treats its queer characters as actual people, while Friends treats them as punchlines. James, Barney's brother, who is gay, gets a ton of characterization in How I Met Your Mother, both positive and negative. We get to see him at his highest and lowest points and his best and worst attributes. In Friends, however, the two notable queer characters are Ross's ex-wife and Chandler's father. Not only is it an issue for obvious reasons that a joke is made out of them every time they appear on screen, but their presence in the narrative sends a straight-up harmful message about queer people. They are both framed as being the reason that a family was broken up, and this having extremely long-lasting negative emotional consequences for our main characters. Chandler's dad I find especially problematic in this regard, because Chandler is constantly talking about how much his dad embarrasses him and how much he wishes that he never had to see him again. I'm fully aware that this kind of situation does happen to people. Sometimes a gay person doesn't fully come to terms with the fact that they're gay until they're in a marriage and they have to break up because of it. But if you're going to tell this kind of story, you need to at least address the positive attributes of making that choice to come out. Friends makes it seem like if you come out as queer, all of your friends and family will be embarrassed to have ever known you and will try to actively forget that you were ever even a part of their life. Friends makes a lot of jokes about minorities that I would consider to be problematic, and I know that this is largely due to the time period that it was created in, but I don't think that this absolves it of any criticism on this front. Sorry if that disappoints you, feel free to blast me in the comments, but everything good has to come to an end, and I gotta move on to bigger and better things. And with that, I conclude why How I Met Your Mother is better than Friends. And that is just my opinion. Thank you all for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. I really love long-form analysis videos, and making them and splitting them up into chunks seems to be a really good way of doing it. I'll be honest, I was kind of talking out of my ass in part 1 when I made all those claims about how fast the videos were going to come out in comparison to how fast it took the Voltron video to come out, but I was absolutely right about everything. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this topic in the comments below, and if my content entertains you, there is plenty more to check out. Oh, also check out my friend Kittycraft, Bubbles on screen, I'm sure. With that said, have a wonderful day, thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.